Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's great to be back.
When we prepare for these deep dives, there's usually a clear path. We take a system, lay it out on the table, and look at the gears. But this time, this one feels different. It feels less like an intellectual exercise.
It feels more immediate.
Immediate and, frankly, a bit raw. Because today we're trying to put a structure around a feeling. I think it's a feeling a lot of us have. You turn on the news, you scroll through social media, and there's this constant low-grade hum of anxiety about who belongs where.
It's a foundational anxiety.
It really is. It's a constant loop, isn't it? We hear about a border crisis here, a deportation battle there.
Right.
We see images of walls going up or razor wire being unspooled. We hear these tragic stories of boats capsizing in the Mediterranean or people perishing in deserts.
And the conversation always seems to get stuck in the same place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It immediately bifurcates into these two camps. It's either we need to be more compassionate, these are human beings, or it's we need to be tougher, a nation has to have borders.
Compassion versus control.
And it feels like a moral dead end. You just end up shouting past each other.
Right.
But what was so arresting about the book we're using as our guide today is that it completely sidesteps that debate.
It reframes the entire problem.
It does. We're looking at The Condition of Democracy, Volume 2, Contesting Citizenship.
Yeah.
And its argument isn't about morality. It's not about whether migration is good or bad or whether people are deserving or undeserving. It's about mechanics.
It treats citizenship like a piece of technology, a governance technology.
And that framing, it changes everything. The book argues that citizenship isn't this noble, patriotic identity we hold. Structurally, it's a machine, a sorting machine. And the reason for all this chaos and tragedy is that the machine is running on obsolete software.
It's trying to process a 21st century globalized, interconnected reality using a design from the 19th century, from the era of sealed-off nation-states. And the noise we're hearing, the political screaming and the human suffering, that's the sound of the machine breaking down.
So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, this isn't our opinion. This is the argument being put forward by the editors of this volume, Jürgen Mackert, Hannah Wolf, and Bryan S. Turner. They use this incredibly powerful metaphor. They say that the container
The itself.
is leaking. And all the political panic we see, all the frantic efforts to build walls and tighten laws, that's not really about ideology.
It's the system trying desperately to plug the holes.
The container is leaking. I really want us to hold on to that image for this entire discussion, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You look at a world map and you no longer see solid lines between countries.
You see a failing pressure vessel, and that metaphor is the key to understanding the systemic logic here.
So let's establish the stakes. Why does diagnosing this machine matter right now, beyond just being an interesting academic exercise?
Because, as the book argues, this leakage isn't just about migration. It explains the nervous breakdown that so many democracies seem to be experiencing. We tend to think democracy is about voting, about elections.
Right, the process.
But this volume makes the case that before you can even get to voting, you have to answer a more fundamental question. Who gets to vote? Who is the people? Who counts as a member?
Who's inside the container?
Exactly. And if that line gets blurry, if you can no longer clearly define who is in and who is out, the entire democratic project starts to feel unstable. The machine begins to shake apart. And that feeling of instability is terrifying to the system and to the people within it.
Okay, so our approach today is purely diagnostic. We are looking at the structure, the incentives. We are not here to assign blame or to decide who deserves what.
We're the mechanics, not the judges.
We're just trying to figure out why the engine is making that loud, clunking noise.
A very loud, very human noise.
So let's get into the specifics of the book. As I said, it's volume 2 of a series, The Condition of Democracy. And the subtitle, Contesting Citizenship, tells you everything. One of the editors, Hannah Wolf, introduces this method for their analysis that she calls zoom in, zoom out.
And this is so critical for any kind of systems thinking, because our default view of citizenship is always at the national level.
The federal government, right. The laws passed in Washington or Berlin or Tokyo, the passport office.
Right, the middle level. But Wolf and the other contributors argued that if you only look there, you're missing the real story. You're missing where the actual conflict is happening. You have to zoom out to see the transnational forces at play.
What does that mean, transnational forces?
Things like the European Union's directives or United Nations conventions on human rights, but also, and maybe more importantly, things like global capital flows, the movement of money, which is almost completely borderless.
Okay, so that's zooming out.
Then you have to zoom in, all the way in, to the local level, to the city, the neighborhood, the hospital waiting room, the church basement.
Because that's where life is actually lived. The rules might be written in a faraway capital, but the consequences play out on your street corner.
Precisely. And the core argument is that these different levels are often at war with each other. A person can be deemed illegal by the nation-state, but be a valued neighbor and worker at the city level, and theoretically be protected by a universal right at the transnational level.
It's a system in contradiction with itself.
A total contradiction. But before we get to that conflict, we need to properly define the central concept. The book is relentless on this point. Citizenship, it says, is a governance technology.
That sounds so cold, so sterile. When you think about what's at stake, families, safety, a person's entire future, calling it technology seems detached.
It's meant to be. The sterility is the point. We're conditioned to romanticize citizenship. We think of flags, national anthems, a shared history, a hand over the heart.
The emotional identity part of it.
Yes. But if you look at it from a systems perspective, if you look at what it does, it's a gatekeeping mechanism. It's a tool. It's a piece of administrative hardware designed to do one thing: allocate scarce resources.
What kind of resources?
All the important ones. Legal rights, physical security from the police, the ability to move freely, access to healthcare, education, social security, and maybe the most fundamental resource of all, recognition. The right to be seen by the state as a person who matters.
So it's a rationing device. It decides who gets what.
It is the primary rationing device of the modern world. And it's built on an idea that is so foundational we don't even notice it anymore. An idea the book calls the container theory of society.
Okay, walk me through the container theory.
Think of a simple Tupperware container. It has 4 sides and a lid that snaps on tight. Inside, you have your soup, your society. Outside, you have the rest of the world. Just air. They don't mix. The inside is ordered. The outside is chaos.
And the lid is the border.
The lid is the sovereign border. For the last few centuries, since the rise of the nation-state, we've organized the entire planet based on this theory. The idea is that a society is a hermetically sealed box. Inside the box, you have law, democracy, rights, and a shared culture.
And outside the box.
Outside is irrelevant. It's the state of nature, the wilderness, another box's problem. The core assumption of our entire political and legal system is that the container can be and should be sealed.
But the central argument of this book is that the seal is broken.
The seal is shattered. The lid is off. The container is leaking from every side. You have the internet, which makes information borders meaningless. You have global supply chains where a product is made in 5 different containers. You have climate change, which doesn't respect borders at all. And most visibly, you have the mass movement of people.
So the outside is now inside.
The outside is inside. The inside is outside. It's all mixed up. But our laws, our political rhetoric, and our institutions are all still acting as if the lid is snapped on tight. And that disconnect, that friction between the theory of the sealed container and the reality of a leaky world, that's the crisis.
When the system's map no longer matches the territory, the system begins to spasm.
It spasms violently.
This is a perfect bridge to the core systems analysis. The book offers several powerful insights into the nature of these spasms. I want to start with what is, for me, the most disturbing one. It comes from Oliver Schmidtke's analysis of the European border regime. And I have to say, this is one of those ideas that once you hear it, it haunts you.
You're talking about the concept of the calculated sacrifice?
The calculated sacrifice, yes. Because typically when we see these horrific images, a capsized boat in the Mediterranean, a story about dozens of migrants found dead in the back of a truck, the official narrative is always one of tragedy.
It's framed as a failure of the system, a terrible accident.
Right. We didn't get there in time. The human traffickers are evil and reckless. The blame is placed on bad actors or logistical failures.
We treat it as a bug, a glitch in the system that we need to patch.
But Schmidtke's argument is, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's a functional requirement of the system's current design, and the logic, when you lay it out, is cold, but it's internally consistent.
Okay, let's try to trace that logic. From the perspective of the state, what is the core product it offers to its citizens?
Exclusivity. The value proposition of citizenship is that it gives you access to a set of benefits, safety, stability, economic opportunity, social welfare that others don't have.
Basic economics. Value requires scarcity. If my platinum membership card gets me into the same lounge as everyone else, it's not a platinum membership anymore. It's worthless.
Precisely. So to maintain the perceived value of the inside of the container, the state must make the outside visibly distinct and, crucially, difficult to enter. You have to create a barrier.
You have to build a wall.
But here's the problem. You can't actually build a wall across the entire Mediterranean Sea. You can't fence every single mile of the Sonoran Desert. It is physically and financially impossible to truly seal the container. So the system needs another way to create that barrier.
So if you can't build the wall,
You make the journey itself the wall. You outsource the enforcement of the border to the hazards of nature.
what do you mean by that?
Schmidtke's point is this. The state agencies, Frontex in Europe, Border Patrol in the U.S., they have the data. They have satellite imagery, they have patrol boats, they have drones. They know the death rates on these routes with chilling precision. They know which policies lead to more deaths and which lead to fewer.
Okay.
If the primary goal was to save every single life, they could do it. They could establish safe, legal corridors. They could set up processing centers in countries of origin so people wouldn't have to make the dangerous journey in the first place.
But they don't do that.
They actively choose not to. Why? Because if they made the journey safe and easy, the logic goes, the number of arrivals would skyrocket. The container would be overwhelmed.
So the danger itself becomes the deterrent.
The danger is the point. The system needs those horrifying images of the capsized boats. It relies on the stories of people dying of thirst. Those stories function as a powerful message broadcast to the rest of the world. Do not even try this. It could kill you. The death toll becomes a grim, unspoken part of the deterrence strategy.
It's a variable in a cost-benefit analysis.
It is the cost that the system is willing to pay, or more accurately, to inflict, to maintain the integrity of the container. It's a human sacrifice made at the altar of sovereignty.
That is an incredibly cynical view of the modern state. It essentially turns our coast guards and border patrols from rescue services into something much darker.
It creates a massive cognitive dissonance, a psychological split within the democratic soul of these nations. Because on one hand, every Western democracy publicly espouses a deep commitment to universal human rights.
Of course. It's in all our founding documents. We believe every life is precious. We sign UN treaties about the rights of refugees.
So you have a system that says, rhetorically, all humans have inalienable rights, but practices, functionally, calculated sacrifice. It claims to believe in universalism, but its actions are dictated by the logic of the exclusive container.
And those two things can't coexist.
They cannot be reconciled. Schmidtke argues you have to pick one. And for the past few decades, the system has consistently chosen to defend the container while using the language of human rights as a sort of moral smokescreen.
It's performative morality that masks structural violence.
That is a perfect summation of the argument. The violence is in the design, not necessarily in the heart of any individual border guard.
That leads us to the second major insight, because this violence isn't administered by a single unified entity. Schmidtke and others also discuss this idea of rescaling, and this is where that zoom-in, zoom-out methodology becomes so important.
Yes, we have a tendency to talk about the state or the government as if it's one big monolithic actor with a single will.
A single brain.
Right. But the reality is that the government is a collection of different levels of authority, and they are often in open conflict with each other. They have fundamentally different incentives.
Okay, let's make this tangible. Let's invent a person. Let's call him Matteo. Matteo is an undocumented migrant. He has successfully crossed the border, and now he's living and working in a major city, let's say a sanctuary city in the U.S. or a big metropolis in Europe.
Okay. So Matteo exists physically, but on paper, at the national level, he's not supposed to be there.
Exactly. So first, let's look at Matteo from the zoomed-out perspective of the nation-state, the federal government. When they look at Matteo, what do they see?
From the perspective of the national government, Matteo is a problem. He is a symbol of a loss of control. He is a tear in the fabric of the container. The incentive for a national politician who has to win elections across a whole country is to project an image of strength and control over the borders.
I'm tough on immigration. It's a classic political message.
It's a message that signals sovereignty. So the incentive at the national level is to find Matteo, detain him, and deport him. Exclusion is the goal, because exclusion proves the container is still sealed.
Okay, that's the national level. Now, let's zoom in. Let's look at Matteo from the perspective of the city, the local mayor's office, the city council, what do they see?
The city sees something completely different. The city sees a resident. They see a person who works in a restaurant kitchen, who rides the bus, who pays rent to a landlord, who buys groceries at the corner store. Mateo contributes to the local economy.
The city is pragmatic. It has to deal with the reality of who is actually there.
It has to. The city's primary incentive is social cohesion and functionality. They have to make sure the trash gets picked up and the hospitals don't have epidemics. If they pretend Mateo doesn't exist, he becomes a public health risk. If his kids aren't in school, they're on the street. If he gets robbed, he can't go to the police, which empowers criminals.
The city operates on a logic of presence, not a logic of legal status.
That's the perfect way to put it. The city has to manage the reality of a person's physical presence. This leads directly to the creation of things like urban citizenship or the sanctuary city movement.
Where the city will give Mateo a municipal ID card or ensure he can access city services like libraries or clinics, regardless of his federal immigration status.
Yes. So you end up with this deeply schizophrenic situation. At the national level, Mateo is an illegal alien, a target for a federal raid by armed agents. But at the city level, he's a recognized participant in urban life. He has a library card. His kids are in public school.
That must be an incredibly precarious and confusing way to live.
It creates a fundamental fracture in the system of governance. The container of the nation-state is being challenged from below by the city. The city is creating pockets of inclusion because it needs to in order to function. The nation is insisting on exclusion because it needs to in order to project power.
So when we see a big city mayor publicly fighting with the president or the prime minister over immigration policy, it's not just political posturing.
It's not just personality clashes. It is a deep structural conflict between two different scales of governance with opposing incentives. The nation is trying to defend a principle, a line on a map. The city is trying to manage a population, a physical reality.
Speaking of these clashes of authority, let's turn to the third insight. This one is from a chapter by Max Oliver Schmidt, and it felt like it was pulled from a different century. It's about the concept of church asylum.
It does feel medieval, doesn't it?
Completely. The image of someone fleeing the authorities and claiming sanctuary inside a church? That's Victor Hugo. That's the Hunchback of Notre Dame shouting, "Sanctuary!" from the cathedral.
And yet it's a very real and surprisingly common practice in countries like Germany today, hundreds of cases every year.
Which begs the question, why does it work? We're taught that the modern state has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Why can't the police just kick down the church door and arrest the person?
To understand that, we have to understand the clash between two different forms of power that Schmidt outlines. The first is what he calls administrative violence.
Administrative violence. That's a chilling phrase. Break that down for me.
When we think of violence, we usually think of an act of aggression, a punch, a gunshot, an individual causing harm to another. But Schmidt argues that a bureaucratic system can inflict immense harm simply by following its own rules without any single person acting out of malice.
Violence by spreadsheet.
Violence by spreadsheet is a great way to put it. He uses the example of the Dublin regulation in the European Union. In simple terms, this rule says that an asylum seeker must have their case processed in the first EU country they entered.
So if you land in Italy, but your only family is in Sweden, and you speak Swedish, too bad.
Too bad. The system treats you like a piece of misdelivered mail. Return to sender. It shuffles people around the continent based on a bureaucratic technicality, completely ignoring the human reality of their lives. It separates families, it sends traumatized people back to countries where they have no support network, and the system is overwhelmed.
And the bureaucrat in Brussels or Berlin who signs the transfer order isn't trying to be cruel. They're just applying the regulation. Form 12B says this person's point of entry was Greece, so they must return to Greece.
Precisely. The harm is an emergent property of the system's logic. The state's incentive is bureaucratic tidiness and risk avoidance. Keep the files moving. This process creates what the book calls a subaltern class of non-citizens trapped in a perpetual state of legal limbo.
And this is where the church comes in.
This is where the church steps in with a completely different system of logic. They invoke the ancient tradition of church asylum. They physically shelter a person or a family inside the church building to prevent their deportation.
But again, why does the state back down? If the law is the law, why the hesitation?
Because this creates a high-stakes standoff between legality and legitimacy. The state operates on the basis of legality, the written rules in the law books. But the church, in this instance, claims to operate on a higher plane, moral legitimacy. They invoke what's called the ultima ratio, the last resort.
Meaning what exactly?
They are making a public claim that the state's law has become so unjust, so divorced from morality, that a higher duty, a divine duty, or a basic human duty must take precedence. They are saying, your spreadsheet is about to destroy a family and we will not allow it.
God's law trumps your regulation.
Effectively, yes. And the state is put in an impossible position. They could legally send in police with battering rams, but they know that the image of state police in riot gear dragging a terrified family out of a church sanctuary would be a public relations catastrophe.
They would look like villains, thugs.
They would lose legitimacy in the eyes of the public. So a strange, unspoken negotiation takes place. The church physically usurps the state's sovereign power, and the state often tolerates this temporary defiance to avoid a much larger crisis of its own legitimacy.
It's fascinating because it reveals that the rule of law isn't this absolute rigid thing we imagine it to be. It can be bent and even broken when it collides with a powerful moral claim.
It exposes the administrative categories as being, at times, arbitrary and inhumane. The church's action is a powerful statement that says, this person is not a case file. They are not a parcel. They are a human being, and we will defend that humanity against your bureaucracy.
Okay, that leads to the fourth insight, which I think zooms out again and tries to explain the emotional fuel for this entire system. It comes from Jaka's analysis, and she asks the fundamental question, why is this happening with such intensity now?
Right. It's a crucial question. Humans have always migrated. Borders have always been contested. But the political fever pitch, the sheer panic around this issue in the last decade or two, that feels new. Why the collective democratic breakdown over this specific issue?
And she introduces a concept that, for me, was a huge light bulb moment. It explains so much about modern politics. The concept is ersatz control.
Substitute control.
Yes, substitute control. The argument starts by looking at the economic reality for the average citizen in most developed nations over the last 40 years, the era of global neoliberalism.
Right. Think about all the forces that shape your life that you have absolutely no democratic control over.
Okay, let's list them. Can you, as an individual voter, really control the inflation rate, which is set by global energy markets and central bank policies?
No, not a chance.
Can you vote to stop your local factory from closing down and moving its operations to Southeast Asia to take advantage of cheaper labor?
Absolutely not. The corporation will do what's best for its shareholders.
Can you stop a global financial crisis triggered by subprime mortgages in one country from wiping out your pension fund in another?
These are vast, invisible transnational forces. They move at the speed of light through fiber optic cables. They are everywhere and nowhere at once.
Exactly. So the average person is left feeling powerless, economically adrift. Their life is being dictated by market forces that are completely beyond their control or even their comprehension. And that feeling of powerlessness is deeply, deeply unsettling. It creates a kind of societal anxiety disorder.
You feel like your life, your community, your nation is no longer yours. You're just a cork bobbing in a global ocean, and you crave a sense of agency. You desperately need to control something to feel like you're still in charge.
But you can't build a wall to stop a stock market algorithm.
Right.
You can't put a tariff on the internet.
There is one manifestation of globalization that is physical, that is tangible, that you can stop.
The migrant?
The migrants. The human body at the border is the only visible, graspable symbol of these overwhelming global forces. You can see them, you can count them, and most importantly, you can build a fence to stop them.
So Yaki is arguing that the political obsession with border control isn't really about the border at all.
She's arguing it's a form of therapy for economic anxiety. It's a displacement activity. It's like the old psychological cliche. You get yelled at by your boss, you feel humiliated and powerless, you can't yell back at your boss or you'll be fired. So you go home and you kick the dog.
And in this analogy, the migrant is the dog.
The migrant becomes the safe, available target for all the rage and frustration that should logically be directed at an intangible and powerful global economic system.
It's a profound reframing. So when a politician stands up and yells, "We have to seal the border," they're not really selling a policy. They're selling a feeling.
They're selling the feeling of control, the illusion of restored sovereignty. Yaka's key insight is that the anti-migration camp acts as if it is reclaiming democratic power from global elites.
But it's a performance. It's a placebo.
It is ersatz control, substitute control.
Yeah.
And the deep tragedy of it is that building the wall doesn't bring the manufacturing jobs back. It doesn't insulate you from the next global recession. It doesn't fix the underlying source of the anxiety. But for a moment, it makes you feel like your container is sealed again. It makes you feel safe.
That explains the sheer emotional force of it.
Yeah.
It's not a rational debate about demographics or economics. It's a primal scream against powerlessness. This all flows perfectly into our next section, where we try to explicitly map this system. We've identified all these different parts: the leaky container, the city versus the state, the church, the psychological drivers. Let's try to put them all on one board and see how they interact.
A proper systems map.
Yes. So let's start with the key actors. Who are the main players on this board, according to the analysis in this book?
Well, front and center, you have the state. But we have to be specific. It's the nation state, and its primary role in this system is what the book calls the jealous guardian of the container. Its prime directive is to perform sovereignty.
To look like it's in charge, even when it's not.
Precisely. Then, as a direct counterforce, you have the migrant. And I think it's really important how the book frames this actor.
It insists they are not just victims, not just passive object.
Exactly. It calls them a political subject. That's a crucial distinction.
What does that mean in practical terms, a political subject?
It means that their actions have political consequences. By the simple act of being present, by crossing a line on a map and making the claim, "I am here," they disrupt the system's neat categories. They force the state to react.
They generate a political question just by existing in a place where they're not supposed to exist.
Yes, their presence is a political act. It challenges the state's monopoly on defining who belongs. They are not just objects of policy. They are agents who force the creation of new policy. They are pushing against the walls of the container from the inside and the outside.
Okay, so we have the state and the migrant. Who else?
Then you have what we can call the intermediate institutions. This is a critical category. It includes the city, which we discussed, providing pragmatic inclusion. It includes the church, or more broadly, NGOs and civil society groups, providing moral or humanitarian intervention. And it includes supranational bodies like the EU or the UN, which provide these contradictory frameworks of universal rights on one hand and border security on the other.
And what about the incentives that make the whole machine run? We've touched on some, like the state's need to signal control.
Legitimacy signaling is number one. Then there's pure electoral advantage. Scapegoating is a powerful tool for winning elections. There's also bureaucratic inertia and budget expansion. Once you create a border security agency, its incentive is to argue for its own expansion, which means it needs to perpetuate the sense of crisis.
And on the other side,
You have labor demand. Employers often quietly want access to cheaper labor, and you have the incentive of moral consistency. The NGOs and churches are trying to force the state to live up to its own professed values.
let's talk about the tools. The book is really clear that narratives are not just stories. They are functional tools. The word crisis, for example.
Crisis is probably the most powerful tool in the entire system. It's a magic word.
We hear it nonstop. The border crisis, the refugee crisis.
Think about what that word does. When you label a situation a crisis, you are implicitly arguing for emergency measures. You are creating the justification for a state of exception.
Right. If it's just a normal policy challenge, you have to follow the normal rules. Due process, judicial review. But if it's a crisis...
Then you can suspend the rules. You can build walls without environmental review. You can detain people indefinitely without trial. The word crisis is a key that unlocks authoritarian powers within a democratic system. It's a narrative hack.
It bypasses the system's own checks and balances.
Absolutely. And then you have the other key narrative tool, the idea of deservingness. The sorting of migrants into the good refugee and the bad economic migrant.
The political refugee fleeing persecution is good. The person fleeing poverty is bad.
The system expends incredible resources, legal systems, interviews, verification processes to try and maintain this distinction. But the book argues it's largely a fiction designed for a political purpose.
Why fiction?
Because in the real world, the motives are almost always mixed. Is a farmer whose land has been destroyed by a climate change-induced drought a refugee or an economic migrant? Is a family fleeing a region controlled by drug cartels, fleeing violence or economic collapse? The line is blurry to the point of being meaningless.
So the purpose of the distinction isn't accuracy.
The purpose is to ration compassion. It allows the state to accept a small, visible number of deserving refugees to signal its morality, while excluding the vast majority of others. It's a public relations tool.
And all of this creates feedback loops. This is maybe the most important part of the map. How does the system sustain itself?
There is a perfect vicious cycle at the heart of this. Let's walk through it. Step 1. A state engages in securitization. It builds a wall, increases patrols.
Step 2.
This makes legal migration routes impossible, so people turn to smugglers and more dangerous, irregular routes.
Which leads to step 3.
The visibility of disorder. The media is filled with images of chaos at the border, people climbing fences, desperate scenes at sea. This looks like an invasion.
Step 4. The public sees this chaos, and it generates fear politics. Citizens become anxious and demand that their leaders do something to regain control.
Which leads directly to step 5. Politicians respond by promising more securitization, more walls, more patrols. And the cycle begins again, only this time with a bigger budget.
It's a self-perpetuating crisis machine. The solution, securitization, is what generates the visible chaos that justifies more securitization.
And it creates a powerful political industrial complex. Companies that build surveillance towers, that run detention centers, that supply the drones, they have a vested financial interest in the crisis continuing. The system is designed to fail in a way that benefits powerful actors within it.
Let's use this map to look at the present day. How does this systemic logic pop up in the world around us beyond the specific case studies in the book? The book talks about a pattern of shrinking belonging.
Yes, this is a recurring historical pattern. When a democracy is put under significant stress, usually economic, but it can also be social or cultural, the definition of who counts as a true member of the community almost always contracts. It shrinks.
It never expands during a crisis.
Never. The circle of trust gets smaller.
Yeah.
It starts with a broad civic definition. Everyone living within our borders is a member. Then, under pressure, it shrinks to only legal citizens. If the pressure continues, it can shrink further to only citizens of the correct ethnic or cultural background.
The real Americans, the true French.
Exactly. It's a defensive crouch. The drawbridge of the castle gets pulled up. We see this rhetoric gaining ground in many, many countries right now, and it connects to the danger of the hybrid regime, which the book warns about, using Hungary and Poland as examples.
What's the connection? How does this obsession with the border lead to democracy decaying from within?
It's a predictable path. A leader who wants to consolidate power argues that the external threat, the migrant, the outsider, is so severe that the nation cannot afford the niceties of democratic checks and balances.
We need a strong hand to protect us.
Precisely. The argument becomes, the courts are too slow, they keep letting migrants in, so I need to control the judges. The press is unpatriotic, they show sympathy for the outsiders, so I need to control the media. The justification for dismantling democratic institutions is always the protection of the container.
So the tools you invent to control the outsider, the surveillance technologies, the suspension of due process, the demonization of dissent, they inevitably get turned inward against domestic political opponents.
The state of exception at the border never stays at the border. It's a virus that infects the entire body politic. The administrative category of illegal becomes a moral category of unworthy. And once a society accepts that some group of people can be stripped of their rights for the sake of security, a terrible precedent has been set. The logic can then be applied to anyone.
It's a terrifying thought, that the passport in your pocket is not a guarantee of permanent rights, but just a temporary status granted by a system whose rules can change.
Which brings us right back to the central theme of this channel, to the crisis in perception. How does this entire analysis change the way we should perceive this issue?
Well, the most obvious shift is moving away from individual blame and towards systems analysis. Our instinct is to find a villain. It's the fault of the migrants for coming, or the fault of a specific politician for being cruel or weak.
The easy narrative.
The easy narrative. But this book forces you to blame the design of the container. The nation-state model, as it is currently configured, is simply not equipped to handle the realities of a globalized world. The friction, the suffering, it's not a bug. It's an inherent product of the machine's design.
And it highlights how profoundly framing shapes belief.
Yes. If the system's narrative frames human movement as an invasion, your natural perception is one of fear, and your desired solution is defense. You reach for a weapon.
But if the system were to frame that same movement as global mobility or a demographic shift, your perception changes completely. You start thinking about management, infrastructural, timetables, and integration. The physical reality of people moving is identical. The perception, and therefore the political outcome, is manufactured by the narrative tool the system chooses to use.
So why do we resist this kind of structural explanation? It seems so much more complete. But politically, it has very little traction.
Because the myth that the system is trying to protect, the sovereignty myth, is incredibly comforting.
The idea that our leaders are in control.
The idea that the container is sealed and we are safe inside. To admit that our national governments can't actually control global economic flows or truly seal their borders is to admit that we are vulnerable and deeply interdependent. And that's a terrifying thought. We prefer the comforting lie of control, the ersatz control of stopping a person at the border over the complex and unsettling reality of interdependence.
We'd rather hold on to a fake steering wheel than admit we're all just passengers on a very large, very fast-moving bus with no driver.
That's a perfect analogy for the psychological state this system produces.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. If you had to distill this entire complex analysis into a few final thoughts, what is the fundamental paradigm shift this book offers us?
I think it offers three. The first is that we need to redefine democracy. We usually think of democracy as how we vote. This volume argues that, more fundamentally, democracy is about who gets to be a member.
The act of defining the we in We the People is the most important political act of all.
It is the foundational act. Second, we need to see borders not as lines on a map, but as institutions of perception management. Their primary function is not just to stop people, but to create and maintain our feelings of safety and danger, of us and them. The third, and perhaps the most sobering, is that rights are conditional. We love the idea that our rights are inalienable, granted to us by God or by nature. This system demonstrates that, in practice, rights are an output of the citizenship machine. If the machine classifies you as out, your rights can, and often do, vanish.
That is a deeply unsettling conclusion. It makes you realize how fragile your own position is, how dependent it is on these administrative categories.
I should make us all a bit less complacent.
I want to leave our listeners with one final provocative question that this deep dive raises. We've talked about the leaky container, the obsolete 19th century design.
So here's the thought I would leave you with. If mass migration driven by economics, conflict, and climate change is the permanent condition of the 21st century, what the book calls the conditio sine qua non, the unavoidable reality.
If it's not a temporary crisis, but the new normal.
And if our democratic systems are still built on the 19th century container model that is fundamentally incompatible with this reality, then are we witnessing a failure of migration? Or are we witnessing the obsolescence of our current model of democracy?
Is the problem the water that's leaking in, or the fact that the container is full of cracks?
The system was designed for a world that, for better or worse, no longer exists. And the crisis we see every day is the sound of that system being torn apart by a reality it cannot process.
A powerful and challenging place to end. We will have to leave it there. A huge credit to the source material for this discussion. The book is The Condition of Democracy, Volume 2, Contesting Citizenship, edited by Jürgen Mackert, Hannah Wolf, and Bryan S.
It's a dense read, but an absolutely essential one for understanding the world we live in.
We encourage you to find it via your local library or university system. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
Every bit of support helps us continue to do these deep dives.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
It's a great way to introduce these complex ideas to others.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thank you for joining us.
Until next time.